Welcome, everybody, to the Girly True Sports Network. I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster. Today, we're going to look back at a long-forgotten NBA story that if you're an Indiana Pacer fan, you definitely never should have forgotten about. If you're a Portland Trailblazer fan, you want to forget about it. If you're a Chicago Bulls fan, you love it. Today, we're going to look at Michael Jordan and how the Indiana Pacers traded Michael Jordan for a little-known, mostly backup during his over-decade career, Tom Owens, in 1981. Now, I know you're going to say, well, it's not really trading him because this is 1981. Michael Jordan hadn't even played his first year in college yet. But the Indiana Pacers were a team that was in a win-now mode, all right? And teams like that love to leverage their future for a taste of success. You win a championship, the fans won't care about a crippled rebuild down the road. We've seen it in baseball numerous times. Fail to leave fans watching a team that is tattered with little hope of drafting their next savior. Just ask Indiana Pacers fans about the win-now trade in 1981 that ultimately cost them a shot at drafting Michael Jordan. Now, leveraging the future by trading draft picks and young talent was common throughout the 70s and 80s in the NBA. Major League Baseball also had that issue. Back then, the NBA wasn't a hot commodity. Fan attendance wasn't great outside of the large markets like LA, Philly, and Boston. And that's because you had Kareem and Magic. You had Philadelphia had Dr. J, Larry Bird in Boston. And the product did not do well on television. It actually failed to capture the TV stations' ratings, and audiences needed to sell ad space. And many of the teams, especially small market teams like Indiana, had owners unwilling to spend the required money to build a competitive team. I think a lot of people forget this, but I'm 56 years old. In like 1980, I was a big Sixer fan. I was always a Pacer fan, but I needed somebody to cheer for during the playoffs. So I cheered for the Sixers in the playoffs. I loved Dr. J. And 1980, NBA Finals Game 6 was tape delay on a Friday night. So was 1981. So was 1982. The 79 had games that were tape delayed. And really, until the finals of 1983 between the Lakers and Sixers, you couldn't see all the games live. I remember sitting there not watching the sports at the end of the news, or the sports would come on and say, hey, if you want to watch the game without knowing who won, look away. They'd show the score, and there you go. Now, to make matters worse for the Indiana Pacers, they acquired additional financial hardships from the ABA-NBA merger in 1976. That the NBA charged each ABA team $3.2 million to join the league and forced the four joining to supply compensation for the two NBA or ABA teams who had folded. The cherry on the top, excluding the ABA teams from their share of the national TV revenue for the first 4 years. So really, the NBA made it damn near impossible for the ABA teams to be successful when they moved to the NBA. And it took a while before we had an old ABA team win a championship. It took over 20 years. Now, simple economics tells us for a business to survive, it must bring in more money than they spend each year, right? Unless you're the WNBA, then you're financed by the NBA and everything will be fine. But the Pacers were in financial hardship. The product on the floor failed to bring in fans as the team floundered at the bottom of the standings. Plus, ownership pumped little money into the organization for roster building. It was next to impossible for the front office to sign high-profile players, let alone keep their homegrown talent. If this was the case, following the 1980-81 season, the Pacers had earned their first NBA playoff berth. They lost in the first round 2-0 to the Philadelphia 76ers. Head coach Jack McKinney was named the Coach of the Year. Yet owner Sam Nassi provided only $1 million to help beef up the roster. To put the $1 million in perspective, the team's starting center, James Edwards, was offered a contract worth $800,000 a year from the Cleveland Cavaliers. To make matters worse, the NBA had implemented a new compensation system at the end of the 1981 season. Gone were the days of receiving cash players or draft picks when a free agent left. Teams now had 3 options. You had the right of first refusal, which was matching the signed offer sheet. You had trade the player or allow them to leave without compensation. The ideal scenario for a team like the Pacers was to trade, allowing them to recoup some of their investment. This is where things go horribly wrong for the Pacers and great for the Chicago Bulls. That seemed to play in with Edwards in June of 1981. The Indianapolis News reported that the Pacers and Trailblazers were discussing a deal. Portland would receive Edwards, and Indiana would get Tom Owens. Edwards is a native of Seattle, Washington, and McKinney had been an assistant coach with the Blazers, so the trade appeared mutually beneficial. Owens was 10 years into his basketball career, including 5 years in the now defunct ABA. Coincidentally, he passed through the Pacers ABA organization in 1975, played 16 games before being sold to the San Antonio Spurs. The Indianapolis Star reported that then Pacers head coach Bobby Leonard was unhappy with Owens' play. His inability to help the team stemmed from coming off the bench instead of being a starter. That was the going theory. In June of 1981, the Pacers and Blazers finalized their trade without one key piece, and this is what kills the Pacers. That key piece was James Edwards. Indiana instead sent their 1984 first-round pick to Portland. It's likely Portland balked at taking Edwards due to his market valuation. Their owner, Larry Weinberg, was notoriously cheap, plus they had Michael Thompson and Kevin Cunnert locked up at the center position. Edwards wasn't as valuable to the Blazers. Even today, it's hard to fathom why the Pacers were willing to trade a first-round pick for Tom Owens. He was a former fourth-round pick himself in the 1971 NBA draft and a perennial backup who only contributed with starter minutes if somebody was hurt. So either Portland swindled Indiana or McKinney overvalued Owens for the 2 years he coached him in Portland. Likely it was a mixture of both. Now, the trade was a simple strategy. The Pacers needed to keep winning. The playoff appearance had boosted their profile both locally and nationally, and they had to ride to success. The ABA dynasty that won 3 championships in 4 years was still fresh on fans' minds, but far removed from the talent displayed at Market Square Arena. Keeping this team competitive would bring in a larger crowd, thus keeping the doors open and potentially providing additional money to use in free agency. With Edwards gone, Owens was now the team's starting center. For McKinney, that was okay because he knew what kind of player Owens was. And he was a starter at times from 77 to 79, with Bill Walton injured in the 77-78 season. Owens started the final 22 games, averaged 37 minutes, 18 points, 11 rebounds. Walton then sat out the 78-79 season with another injury. Owens averaged 34 minutes, 19 points, 9 rebounds. So Tom Owens could definitely play, but he was still a backup to Bill Walton. McKinney left Portland in 1979 to become the head coach of the LA Lakers. Of course, that would not turn out well, as before he ever got to win an NBA championship with a great Lakers team, everything kind of fell apart as he got hurt, badly hurt, in a bike accident before the 1979 season, or right at the start of the 79 season. That's how he ended up in Indiana for 1980. Now, after McKinney leaves there, Walton also left Portland. He opted to sign with the San Diego Clippers in the offseason. Owens had been heading back to the bench until the projected starting center, Michael Thompson, broke his left leg. Back in his starting role, Owens played like his previous 104 regular season games, 30 minutes, 16 points, 8 rebounds. This was the Tom Owens that McKinney expected. This is who they had traded a first-round pick for. Scouting was negligible back then, so the draft was considered a crapshoot outside of the top picks. To the Pacers, risking a draft pick 3 years from now was worth trying to raise their profile today. It was also a big man-dominated league. The MVP caliber players were in the front court, not like today. Guys like Kareem, Moses Malone, Bill Walton, Artis Gilmore. To be competitive, you needed a competent post player. Owens was a competent post player. That mindset also led the Pacers to draft former Ohio State center Herb Williams in the first round of the 1981 NBA draft. You could never have enough centers, was what McKinney thought. Now, McKinney's expectations for Williams to play power forward and backup center, as Owens only had 2 years left on his contract, taking over for center of Owens a couple years later. Little did they know, a paradigm shift was in progress, moving from lumbering big men to acrobatic shooters. Guys like Michael Jordan, Dominique Wilkins. The league was full of them 5 years after this. For the first time in 10 games, for the first 10 games of the 1981-82 season, Owens played exactly like McKinney had expected. He averaged 31 minutes, 16 points, 7 rebounds. His impact was meaningless, however, as the Pacers started the season 4-6. Then Owens got hurt. He continued to play, but his minutes dropped, eclipsing 30 plus only twice the rest of the season. Eventually, he lost his starting job to Clem Johnson, finishing the season with 40 starts while averaging 21 minutes, 10 points, 5 rebounds. All regressions from his previous season. And just like that, the Tom Evans theory was proven right again. The Pacers failed to make the playoffs. They finished 9 games worse than the year before, 35-47. They drafted power forward Clark Kellogg in the 1982 NBA draft, allowing them to move Herb Williams back to his natural position of center. This move made Owens expendable. The team eventually traded Tom Owens to the Detroit Pistons in September of 1982. To be fair to Owens, the Pacers failed to put him in a successful position because the Pacers always failed to put their players in a successful position. If analytics existed in the same vein that they do today, maybe the Owens trade never happens, or they trade a later round pick. The success of Williams was also unexpected, further causing issues with Owens' potential success. In the 82-83 season, the Pacers finished 20-62. In 83 and 84, 26-56. Even if Owens had stuck around until after his contract expired at 83, it's unlikely he would have made a 20-plus win difference. 1980 had been a fluke playoff appearance. Now, it's easy to look back with knowledge of the future and call the Pacers incompetent. But in many ways, that's the only thing you could call the Pacers of the late 70s and early 80s incompetent. You know, they traded Alex English during the 79-80 season, only to watch him become a Hall of Fame player with the Denver Nuggets. Unfortunately, their hubris got the best of them in 1981. It cost them the number 2 pick in the overall draft, where the greatest basketball player of all time would have safely landed in their lap. So when we look at this thing, I mean, a lot of people would say, well, they were incompetent. So since the Pacers were incompetent, maybe they would have drafted Sam Bowie. But that's highly unlikely. All right. To really rub it in to Pacer fans, the 1984-85 Pacers had Herb Williams, they had Steve Stepanovich at center. So it would be unlikely to take a Sam Bowie, who Portland selected ahead of Jordan, only to have his career wrecked by foot injuries. And really, Sam Bowie's career was wrecked by injuries, even when he was in Kentucky, even at Kentucky in college. They also had a pre-injury Clark Kellogg. So up front, and this is the thing that will drive you nuts as a Pacer fan. You had Herb Williams, you had Steve Stepanovich, you had Clark Kellogg, you had Vernon Fleming and Jerry Sheesting in the backcourt. Now, that's hardly an NBA All-Star team, but you had a rookie Jordan, and it's a playoff team. And it's a playoff team probably well above 500, and you just never know what happens. Now, I'm sure Reggie Miller probably doesn't end up in Indiana Pacers, which would have sucked because all Pacer fans love Reggie Miller. But the Pacers would have had Michael Jordan if not for trading Tom Owens for its first-round pick 3 years later. Now, as a Pacer fan, you got Reggie Miller, you got the NBA Finals. If the Michael Jordan move was made, it's hard telling how this would have worked out. But I can tell you, as good as Jordan was, there were going to be championships won either way. Now, would Jordan have been as good? Yeah, he'd have been as good. He was born that way. He worked his ass off. He was a great player. He was special. The Portland Trailblazers blew it by taking Sam Bowie. Of course, the Houston Rockets had the first pick. Nobody gives them crap because they picked Hakeem Olajuwon, who in my mind is a top 5 center of all time. You can't blame them for that. But the Indiana Pacers had a chance to be a contender almost immediately if they wouldn't have made that trade, or if they would have just traded Tom Owens for the 2nd or 3rd round pick. And they probably could have got him for a 2nd or 3rd round pick. So the bumbling Pacers front office of the late 70s and early 80s cost the Indiana Pacers a date with Michael Jordan. And as an Indiana basketball fan, we can only imagine what would have happened. All right, guys, make sure you follow me on X at Grueling Truth. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell notification on YouTube, like and follow us on Facebook, and make sure you hit thegruelingtruth.com. But for now, guys, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been watching and listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.